In Monday's episode, we talked about this idea of bridges, the people that are positioned within the organization to translate the what into the how through PLCs, through staff meetings, through classroom observations, through school goal setting in collaboration with the school level leadership team. So I wanted to just talk through an example that I'm seeing with one of our district partners currently. So we have a district partner who is responsible for supporting math for middle and high school within their organization. So they have a partner at the elementary level, and then this is one person who supports grades 6 through 12. And I think that this person had this realization that, this work is too big to own on their own. Like without having this explicit conversation about bridges at the time, because at the time I didn't think I had this language and we didn't have this language to share with them. She identified that it's like she needed shared ownership of this work. She couldn't get into classrooms frequently enough. She couldn't get into every single PLC. She wasn't at every staff meeting to be able to support this work, but who is? And that was kind of the question, like, who are the people within the organization that she could build the capacity in to be able to internalize the objective. Their objective in particular is around discourse. And then, what work did she have to do with these people? Like, what capacity building did they need? She had to identify them, and then she had to provide explicit capacity building.
Yeah. And it fits perfectly in what we're trying to teach our teams, because we oftentimes, after, like, let's say we've already established stage one, which is objectives, vision, key results. We're getting into the nitty gritty of like how we're going to carry out, these big moves that we want to make. Oftentimes we have to help our teams come to terms with going more narrow than they originally thought. And then one of the ways that we say, like, going more narrow, which means like we have to almost like put our own mentality around trying to do the greatest good for the greatest number all the time when it's just one or two of us doing the work. We need to get narrow so that we can give intensive support to some goals, some people, some team members, so that we can amplify the work, we can compound the work. And so when she's saying, like, I can't do this alone, because otherwise you are just focusing on the greatest good for the greatest number, you will never get there. Who are those people? Who's the team that we can then give the intensive support? So that goes in line with like getting narrow, but it also goes in line with what we talk about bright spots. It's like focusing in on bright spot teams, bright spot individuals that can amplify the work, do this work so that you can compound from year to year to year. So that just falls in line with exactly what, she's trying to do and what we would recommend.
Well, and it brings me back to in the last episode where at the top of the episode, we talked about the what, and then we talked about the who, and there's a big in between there as well. And it's like, if people don't actually understand the what with clarity, when we try to, reach and try to touch everyone in the district, and trying to have that impact because we want the greatest good for the most people, what we end up doing is we actually perpetuate the telephone game, right? So it's like a lot of the work that we're actually doing actually isn't going to be helpful for what we're trying to accomplish, even though we're working really hard. It feels great to be able to be working with different, people across the district. It might feel like things are working really well, but then at the end of the day, we don't see any actual systemic change, right? You might get those pockets of success, but imagine if we took those pockets of success and we actually spent more time with those individuals. And ideally, those are the who's that are going to be our bridges, and really strengthen them so that when you leave that building or when you are not around, that you feel more confident that the message is not only clear, but they're actually feeling confident that they can share it. Because the worst thing we could possibly do is be someone who feels like they're in a leadership capacity or leadership role, but they're actually not clear on the messaging. So what do you do in that case? You usually don't push it as hard because you're not confident, right? So you need to have that confidence. And I think this just speaks to, we say it all the time, but it's really, really important to remind us that it is not a bad thing to be focusing on less so that we can ultimately in the long term get way more.
That's what this district leader had to come to terms with last year, was that it's okay if I spend this year focusing on these bridges. Like, it's like they had to give themselves permission to say, this year will be a success if by the end of the year these individuals are better positioned to support this work moving forward. So instead of it being one person positioned to do this work, it's now 7. So the first group that they targeted were their instructional mentors. And so again, this district leader had to give themselves permission that they were going to put their energy, their time, their observation opportunities into building the capacity of the instructional mentors. And one of the structures that I love that they used in this district to build up that understanding of internalizing the objective. So remember, their objective was around increasing discourse, student-to-student discourse in classrooms. They were trying to, as an action step, support the implementation of 5 practices for orchestrating productive discussions. So when they came together during their meetings, they worked through 5 practices. And it wasn't like they were talking about 5 practices. They actually lived it.
Yeah.
So it's like they identified a task, they established the learning goal. They then would do a mock classroom, just the 7 of them, where they would actually have somebody play the role of the teacher that day. They would work through the task. They would talk through the monitoring, selecting, sequencing. And like they did this multiple times, like over and over again, so that they really deeply understood this structure for planning to position teachers to facilitate discourse in their classrooms. They weren't even going and doing it with teachers yet. Mm-hmm. Like they didn't feel that they as a team had the capacity yet to replicate this in their PLCs or with teachers. They needed to really internalize the planning structure themselves. So like these are examples of when we talked last time about we need to internalize the objective, but we also need to practice coaching moves, coaching conversations. And the interesting thing in this particular organization is that these instructional mentors didn't all have math backgrounds. So imagine the added complexity, right? Where you're going in and you're coaching a math teacher on discourse in the math classroom, but you have a science background or you have a language background. And so really supporting them and having confidence to engaging these conversations with teachers was a part of the work as well. So that was stage 1 of, identifying bridges, was building the capacity of the instructional mentors who had more touch points with teachers, who were in classrooms more frequently, who had the ability to participate in PLCs. But go ahead. And then I'm going to tell you I thought was really interesting is that was year 1. And part of the work in year 1 was co-constructing with this team this look for document of like what it looks like now and what it looks like when it's fully implemented. And that look for document becomes like a monitoring tool, a conversation starter, a self-assessment for the teachers that we're supporting. This year though, and then I'll let you guys jump in, they are expanding their team to include department heads. So now we have the central office coordinator, the instructional mentors, and also department chairs or department heads from each of the sites who are now being brought into these conversations, into these training sessions. They're being brought in to provide feedback on the look for document. They're getting into classrooms and using the look for document and then giving feedback on it. And so this team went from 1 to 7, and now we've added, 7 more people onto this team this year.
Right. And you can see the compounding happening already in that district by just going narrow and then slowly building out and widening. Think about it like this too. It's like, and to be honest, like many of our district partners take this approach. Sometimes they have the 7. Somebody's calling it the magic 50. Somebody's calling it the math council or the math task force. Like people are saying, I'm collecting a few that I can support individually because I know there's only 1 of me, 2 of me, and we can support that many to carry this work out and make sure that they are exemplifying exactly what we're trying to do in our classrooms across. But what you're doing is you're doing the repeated reps. Like there's this idea that like we always strive for quality first, and this is again going to the greatest good for the greatest numbers. Like we want quality. We want everyone to have quality, and then sometimes there's these ideas that volume negates luck. Like quantity sometimes makes quality, which means like, can I support these 7? And she's doing this well, right? Can I support these 7 to get clear and more clear and even more clear and even more stronger at what we're really trying to do here in the district? Like she's getting the reps in by supporting the 7. and then continually supporting the 7 in year 2, and then supporting them to support others is just slowly, like almost like little test groups. It's like I'm testing that this is the right thing that we're working on, and we're building up our quality because we're doing more quantity on a faster scale. And that's such an important idea to kind of think about, because you can, and also I know you want to jump in here, Kyle, but think about this. If you weren't clear on the objectives at the first place, if she wasn't clear on like what it looks like and committed to saying those are important for 10 years of work, you can imagine that why that's so important, that when you roll into year 2 and all of a sudden you're branching from 7, because you got hundreds of teachers in your district and you're going, well, we have to commit this long because this is the work. This is the compounding effect. And if we switch 2 years from now, then the 7 are going to be great teachers. And then maybe the expanded circle are great educators as well. But it's like now we have to go back to the drawing board because maybe all of a sudden these other pieces need to be strengthened. So sticking to the work is important and having those objectives. Okay, well, Kyle.
The vision that I had in my mind is like just this impatience we have in life with anything that takes time. And I go back to, everyone knows on the podcast how much I love teaching compound interest, to kids, and showing like you could turn a penny a day doubled for 1 month into millions and millions of dollars. The problem is that at the beginning, it seems like nothing. And actually for half of the month, it's nothing. It's the second half of the month where everything starts to happen, right? So, for those who don't know, we had an episode on this way back when. You double a penny a day. It's like, you get to the second week and you're still going like, oh my God, I've only got like a handful of dollars here. By that last day, you have something close to $30 million by just repeating this process. So when I hear you say that about, the quantity, the reps, right? It's about doing it and continuing to do it and continuing to believe and continuing to do it with the same group. Because if we do it with the entire group, that compound effect doesn't happen, right? You stay in that first week of doubling the penny with everyone, and you'll be lucky if you make it to the second week of doubling the penny with people in a couple of years. And therefore, what ends up happening, we as humans, we're impatient and we move on. We start moving and changing our goals, saying it must be the goal. It must be this. It must be something else, magic. When in reality, really what it comes down to is by trusting the process and saying like, if this is good work, if we understand the work and we're all clear on the work, and then we move to that next level and we find those people that we can truly support and put those reps in, that compounding effect will take effect. And over the long term, it's going to win. The hardest part is convincing ourselves and trusting, and then not losing trust when you're in the second week of compounding, knowing that those next couple of weeks are coming soon. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't just take us a month, right? We have to take that month of compounding the penny and we have to stretch it out over a longer period of time, months and even years, in order for us to start to see, the fruit of our labor actually sort of taking effect. So hopefully these analogies that we're using is helping people to convince themselves and then reconvince themselves. This might mean that you're going to have to meet with your leadership team and remind each other of why you're doing what you're doing, because it gets hard. And sometimes it feels like nothing's happening, when in reality, a ton of things are happening under the surface, and you just have to be patient and follow and trust the process.
This leader, I said, how would you define success for yourself this year? Like, what would be a win? If I come to you in May and I say, was this year successful for you? And she said, this year will be a success if my department chairs by the end of the year see themselves as instructional leaders. That's right now they see themselves as managers, or they do, ordering and organizing and pacing. But it's like, if by the end of the year they see themselves as instructional leaders, that will be a win, because they have far more opportunities to engage with teachers than she does. They have department meetings. They have periods where they're free, where they could be in classrooms observing and providing feedback and team teaching and co-teaching. The structures are in place for this person to be a leader in their building. It's not being leveraged that way currently. So the wins are, I want my department chairs to see themselves as instructional leaders, and I want us to have a more aligned understanding of what discourse looks like in the classroom. Because right now, what we all say discourse is, doesn't look the same, sound the same, feel the same. And so we need to get closer and more aligned in our definition of true mathematical discourse. And if that happens this year with just this group of middle leaders, that will be a win for this district leader.
To me, it's beautiful because it's actually a perfect example of how those two key pieces, those two strands are intertwining. So we're talking about internalizing the objectives. So we're hearing that and getting clear on what mathematical discourse looks like, sounds like, and is in our math classrooms. And it's supporting the bridge to be a leader, to be a coach. Because I vividly remember this as a department head, that you're in a position that's supposedly a leadership position, but I interviewed for it and then I was it. And that was it. I didn't have any support. So I didn't want to, a lot of times people feel like they don't want to be bossy. They don't want to tell people what to do, they shouldn't do these things. These are not leadership skills, but where do we get that from? Just because we wear a hat doesn't necessarily mean we're ready to do that work. So it sounds to me like, they're doing both and they're doing them in tandem, which is really important. And the key piece here is that if the department head doesn't feel like they are the bridge, even though they might have been told, you're the department head and you're going to be the bridge, if they don't feel like they're able to do that work, then it's going to be difficult for that to take force. So really focusing on helping them with those leadership pieces and those coaching skills is going to, go quite the distance along the way. So great example here.
Yeah. And what I love about the pathway she's on is that by setting her key results that you just, defined, these 2 wins by the end of the year, she's also set up, methods for her to track her progress on these so that she can answer this fundamental question that we all need to answer or be accountable to, is that when we look back on the year, like when we get to June, we get to May, or we get to July, is that what were the things that moved the needle? What were the things that got us closer to our vision for mathematics? And how do I know that we're closer? And if we can answer that, we've got wins, and because you've collected the wins, and she's on a great pathway to collecting those wins because she's defined them, but also she's moving on the right pieces to see that progress. So if we talked about this particular example, if you also are wondering, how to structure a math improvement plan in these ways, we talked a lot here specifically about kind of this combination between stage 1 and stage 2 for us. Stage 1 is vision, objectives, key results. Stage 2 is about aligning the right pieces and the right team members. The 4th stage is also about inspiring growth. And a lot of times when we get to that part of the work we're doing with our teams, we're talking about motivation, but we're talking about team structure. We're talking about setting up sustainability for long-term success. And this is where these compounding ideas come from, is we have to sometimes have these mindset shifts as leaders to take these new initiatives on. So if you're looking for some guidance there, you can always head over to makemathmoments.com/discovery, hop on a quick call with us, and we can steer you in the right direction in terms of all 4 of these stages for math improvement. So thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.